What happens when artists stop painting what they see and start painting what they feel? Expressionism wasn't about reality. It was about raw emotions splashed onto canvas. Art has always been tied to the world around it, and at the dawn of the 20th century, that world was anything but calm. Europe was teetering on the edge of modernity, cities booming with factories, crowds, and machines, while underneath old traditions cracked under the pressure. People were anxious. The Industrial Revolution had changed everything: work, family, even how people saw themselves. And just as society grew louder and faster, politics grew darker. Tensions between nations mounted, and whispers of war began to hang in the air. For artists, the old ways of painting no longer fit. Realism captured details, but not the unease. Impressionism shimmered with light, but missed the dread. Symbolism explored dreams, but avoided the raw pulse of fear and desire that filled everyday life. Something was missing. That missing piece was feeling, unfiltered, unpolished, sometimes ugly emotion. Expressionism rose as the answer. Instead of showing the world as it looked, these artists wanted to show how it felt. A crowded street might be painted not with neat details but with distorted faces, twisted buildings, and harsh colors that carried anxiety. A portrait might not capture beauty, but rage or despair. Here's the tension. For centuries, art had been expected to be beautiful, balanced, and skillful. Expressionism broke that contract. It said the human soul mattered more than polish. The inside was more important than the outside. And that shift would ignite one of the most radical movements in modern art. Imagine walking into a gallery in 1905. On one wall, you see landscapes bathed in soft light, portraits with smooth lines, and brushwork that feels controlled, almost polite. Then, in the corner, something shocks you: a painting exploding with unnatural colors, jagged strokes, and faces twisted into masks of pain or joy. That was Expressionism crashing into the art world. What made it so different? For one, Expressionists didn't care if their art looked real. They bent perspective, warped figures, and splashed colors where they didn't belong. Because emotion mattered more than accuracy. If sorrow felt blue, they painted blue. If rage felt red, they painted red, even if the scene in front of them wasn't. Another radical shift. Expressionism didn't just want to show feelings, it wanted to drag the viewer into them. Standing in front of these works, you weren't just admiring. You were almost trapped inside someone else's mind, forced to wrestle with their fear, their loneliness, their ecstasy. But Expressionism wasn't one single style. It had currents. In France, painters like Matisse and his group, the Fauves, unleashed wild, almost violent color. In Germany, groups like Die Brocke and Der Blaureiter took the experimentation further, twisting forms into haunting visions of society, spirituality, and nature. And here's where the suspense builds. While critics called it ugly, disturbing, even dangerous, Expressionism's artists believed they were cutting closer to the truth than any realistic painting ever could. Their rebellion wasn't just against tradition. It was against a world they felt was losing its humanity. Every movement has its voices, and Expressionisms were anything but quiet. These painters didn't just create art, they carved their emotions into history. Let's start with Edvard Munch, whose painting The Scream has become one of the most famous images in the world. Munch captured not just a figure on a bridge, but the very sound of modern anxiety. The swirling sky, the gaping mouth, the vibration of color. It wasn't just a scene, it was a panic attack on canvas. In Germany, the group Die Brücke, or The Bridge, formed in Dresden. Artists like Ernst Ludwig Kirchner used jagged lines and raw colors to reflect the alienation of urban life. Their figures looked uneasy, distorted, caught in a city that felt more like a machine than a home. Then came Der Blaureiter, the Blue Rider, in Munich. Led by Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc, they weren't just painting the outer world, they reached for the spiritual, the invisible. Kandinsky moved toward abstraction, convinced that colors and shapes could play like music on the soul. Marc painted animals in dazzling colors, hoping they revealed purity humans had lost. Expressionism also had a darker edge. Egon Schiele filled his portraits with twisted, emaciated figures, exposing the fragility and desire hiding under the surface of everyday life. His work unsettled audiences, but it forced them to look at truths they wanted to avoid. Here's the suspense. These artists weren't simply painting, they were pulling apart the human condition, piece by piece. and the more they revealed, the harder it became for viewers to turn away. Expressionism wasn't just theory, it left behind works that still jolt us, even a century later. These paintings don't whisper from museum walls. They shout, they tremble, they demand attention. Think again of Edvard Munch's The Scream. Its figure, hands clamped to the face, seems to echo across time. Every generation has looked at it and thought, yes, that's how fear feels. It's not just art, it's a universal cry. Or take Wassily Kandinsky's composition VI. At first glance, it looks chaotic, splatters of color, tangled lines, no clear subject. But stand in front of it long enough, and it begins to hum like music. Kandinsky believed paintings could be symphonies for the eyes. And this canvas is proof of that belief. Then there's Franz Marc's Blue Horse Eye, a radiant animal, painted not in natural browns but in glowing blues, standing against a landscape of green and yellow. Marc wasn't painting reality, he was painting purity, an inner vision of harmony untouched by war. And we can't forget Egon Schiele's portraits, often gaunt, twisted, and uncomfortably raw. They reveal vulnerability in a way that still unsettles viewers today. His figures feel like they're staring back at us, asking, "Are you willing to see me as I am?" Here's the suspense: these works are not locked in the past. Their emotional voltage hasn't dimmed, and that's the strange power of Expressionism. Its relevance doesn't fade, because the feelings it captured never left us. When the 20th century marched forward, Expressionism didn't vanish, it mutated, leaving fingerprints on almost every creative field that followed. In painting, the movement cracked the door open for abstraction. Without Expressionism daring to toss out rules of realism, Kandinsky and later abstract artists might never have found permission to push further. Even the chaotic energy of abstract expressionists in post-war America, think Jackson Pollock dripping paint across vast canvases, traces back to the emotional intensity Expressionism demanded. In cinema, directors borrowed the distorted angles and unsettling shadows of German expressionist films like A Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. That style bled into horror, film noir, and even modern thrillers. Every time you see a scene bathed in eerie light or tilted to make you uneasy, Expressionism is lurking in the frame. In literature and theater, the echoes were just as strong. Playwrights bent dialogue and staging to capture raw states of mind, rather than neat, realistic plots. Expressionism gave artists permission to distort reality in service of truth. But perhaps the deepest legacy is this: Expressionism proved that art didn't need to comfort, it could confront. It could expose what society wanted to hide. It could make you feel something you weren't ready to feel. And that boldness shaped not just modern art, but how we think of creativity itself. Here's the cliffhanger: Expressionism wasn't just about painting strange faces in strange colors. It rewired the very question of what art is supposed to do, a question we're still wrestling with today. Expressionism began as a cry against a world unraveling, a demand to paint not what the eye sees, but what the soul feels. It tore apart the traditions of beauty and perfection, replacing them with raw emotion, distorted shapes, and unsettling truths. And because of that courage, it changed art forever. When you look at an expressionist painting today, you're not just looking at color and form. You're looking into a mirror that reflects human fear, longing, and intensity across generations. That's why these works still feel alive. They speak because they never pretended the world was simple. So here's the takeaway: Expressionism wasn't only about art, it was about honesty. It dared to say, this is what it feels like to be human, even when it's uncomfortable. And that's the question it leaves us with: if art can reveal so much truth, what would your expression look like? If this journey through Expressionism gave you new insight into art's power, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves creativity, and subscribe for more stories that bring the world of art to life. Because this is just the beginning, and the next chapter of art history will surprise you even more.